the last time that we were sat in a room together doing something like this was back in March at Gymshark.
Yeah. We have a clear line of sight right down the middle of the building. You can see the structure of the building. You can see the height. You can see the 11 metres to the apex. You can see the 100 metre in length. You can see this clear channel.
Obviously, we've upgraded our capabilities quite substantially since then.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of interested. Like, I never really asked you, like, how was that for you? And did people give you any feedback to, that video that we produced with your voiceover?
Yeah, it was really interesting, actually. The feedback was all really positive. Probably far too many people telling me that I should be doing more voiceover work, and I was like, we just did it on the fly, didn't we?
Yeah,
and it just worked. I think. I wonder why it worked. I think it was just, you're in that moment that you're getting towards the end of a job, and you've lived that project, particularly that project, the scale of that project. You've lived it for it was a year plus.
Well, you've been talking to those guys for a long time because of the relationship.
For 4.5 years, I think, all in all. And you're so ingrained and you have so much knowledge around the plan and the strategy and the organisation of it that I think when we just sat down, very late one night in a
that must have been pushing 10 o'clock, I reckon. By the time we were
there. But it was a really good moment because we'd had such fun with the filming it was actually an incredibly kind of cathartic moment because it allowed just a bit of time and reflection back on what we had achieved and what we had done and how I'd been a part of helping their growth, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, we were kind of crammed into this little meeting room, and it just kind of served as a sound booth, which worked really well. Yeah. But kind of want to hear more about, I guess, you on a day-to-day basis, really, in your role and what you do for Oktra. I
guess if we go sort of back to, my roots, I'm a designer, right? I'm a creative director, so I'm a designer. What that is there are kind of two phrases. Something stuck with me many years ago. Chap I used to work for, he said to me that once upon a time, a designer is a great designer is a chameleon. It always kind of stuck with me, but what you come to learn is it's about being adaptable. It's about having the ability to adapt to the needs of the environment. Ultimately, in our commercial world, the client's environment. How do you adapt and become a part and seamless and not be seen in their space, and then you kind of can create something appropriate for them. So, and that's always stayed with me because I think it's a wonderfully kind of emotive description as to what you need to be a good designer. But things evolve, right? Everything evolves and grows. And I guess with the more and more experience that we've gained over the years of looking and adapting organisations, it's quite naturally led into my today is really an analytical, strategic. It's looking at organisations, trying to find the best way that they should change and adapt. And it's accelerated, really. It's accelerated. What a workplace is today has accelerated from, designers. When you just put 4 or 5 visionary designers in a room, they would, we would be talking about, 5 years ago, we would be talking about the future office being this kind of incredibly social hub. And it was about connections and interactions and far less about process and, because that sort of thing with technology, we can all process on the train, on a phone, or, there's so many new ways that we're adapting to working. Yeah. And the time zone time isn't as much of a restriction to any of us anymore. And so, 4 or 5 years ago, several of us here in the office kind of debating like what the future workplace was. You let your mind run away and it could become anything we want it to be. And then we had this kind of the whole pandemic thing in many ways, and what we're now talking about in workplaces, it's accelerated in many ways, I believe it's accelerated the need for change.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's one of those things where it's hard to say because obviously there was a lot of loneliness and a lot of bad stuff that came out of it. But in the most positive way of looking at it, I do think that for workplace and design specifically, it's one of the best things that could have happened because, as you say, it was a catalyst. It changed things, it accelerated it. But I wonder how far or how quickly we would have got this far down the road had that basically 2 years of you now have to work at home and there are no other choices. Would we have kind of got to this place?
20 years.
Reckon?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I go back to conversations I was having with clients 15, 20 years ago. And, back then we were talking about, how a breakout space and how we need to, do more than just a pokey little tea point thing in the corner. And, your people needed to be watered and fed. And then it no, we need to do more than that. And, it was either a meeting room or a desk.
Yeah.
And that was kind of it. That was your choice.
Yeah,
there was
what else
not.
do you need?
Yeah. And look, I mean, you go back 10 years and, the Googles and the Facebooks and, what was happening in sort of West Coast USA. And that started to get people thinking that it could be more in the slides and the ball, and the ping pong tables and all that sort of stuff. And it started to accelerate a change. But it had its critics, right? If it was just fun without purpose, it didn't maybe work certainly in European kind of standards and beliefs. It was a different thing.
Yeah.
And it started to kind of new organisations, new businesses. I mean, I can't quite recall off the top of my head, but there's a statistic around, I believe it's something to the tune of, we might need to check this back, but to the tune of 50% of job roles today didn't exist 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, take my job title.
Yeah.
Head of content.
Yeah.
For that even to be in a D&B company, that still seems mad. There's not many of us now. So
no,
stuff has changed super fast.
And we've got to, we have to all be adaptable to that change. And I think that, I guess the question we were asking there, like, when would it have changed? And I believe it would have been another 20 years. Yes, there's been progression away from the desk kind of activities and we've started with these new roles coming into the workplace. We've realised that there aren't the old traditions and the old processes, and there are just new ways of communicating, digitally, face to face. I mean, and hybrids between those two, and we're having to make space change and adapt. So there has definitely been a shift pre-pandemic towards less at the desk activity. But now the reason it's accelerated, I mean, let's just say for argument's sake, it was like 20 years, right? Yeah. And it's down to like 2 now. It's not really 2, it's sort of 4 or 5 because we're still in that space where...
Yeah, it's not finalised. No. We don't have a lot of the answers still.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's in many ways the trickiest space that we're in right now. There are some that have taken some take what others might perceive as the radical kind of end of the spectrum, and they've said, like, I have a couple of clients, one said, right, no, we need everybody back in. But have managed to deliver and do that with an incredibly positive, and I think this is the most important thing for me, it's if we're affecting change, it has to be for a positive, and it has to be with good reason. And for them, they recognised that there was no learning and development, and actually the people that weren't coming, or the people, when we analysed who was coming into the office, the sub 3 years experience in their organisation were the majority, significantly the majority users of a space. And what they were crying out for is I want to be around people that have done this job before, that I can learn from and all that sort of stuff. So all of a sudden, actually, that's a tough thing, I think, for a leadership team to say, do you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to say you all need to be in because, I mean, it's not a dictate, right? But I think there's a bit that...
Some companies are going towards that mandate approach because I think particularly leaders, big companies, they're a bit of a loss. And obviously things like the Apple kickback the other week, that's obviously on a big scale, but that'll be happening on a micro scale that won't be in the news. And I almost feel that there are some people that have kind of got there and they've done what they needed to do and it's worked. But there's plenty of companies that are still like, well, what shall I do now? How do I find out what to do?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a minefield, really.
It is. I think that there is no I mean, I was going to say there's no right or wrong answer. There are definitely examples of wrong,
course.
right?
Yeah,
there really are out there. I'm finding increasingly the most appropriate thing to do is considered, measured approach, careful debate, engage, all of these. We need people to be involved in that decision, be an influencer in that decision. I think is really important. We talk a lot about it, making sure that there's influencers to that decision-making process, that it isn't just done by a committee. They need to have information and they need to be informed, and we need to, I'm trying to think what where this. The fear is often actually around fear of making the wrong decision prevents you from making a decision.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And that's the toughest place that we find organisations in at the moment. The other really tough thing is that those that made decisions in the early part of like, what does hybrid look like?
Yeah.
It actually means different things for different businesses, right?
Yeah.
And the toughest thing is if people have made like a really firm, this is us forever, this is what we're going to do. And
the thing is, I guess that's the slippery slope of it, is that there was a point in time where decisions did need to be made, but some have maybe gone pretty bold and said, this is what we think is right and therefore what we're doing. But yeah, I mean, you see it all the time, particularly on social media, like the news that comes out, the articles that come out, there's so many people that are still kind of like in this weird sort of grey area of, we've got office space, but we've also got flex space. People are also working from home.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess that kind of comes back to trying to work out exactly what it is that you need from your space. And I think people are now in that position of what do we actually do? What do we actually need?
Yeah, it's I often think a kind of more about a brand's culture.
Right.
And I think in that stuff probably lies the answer as to what you're going to do. Are you leaders? Are you followers? Are you, I guess visually I'm picturing this much more towards the global brands that organize, that we all know, that we're familiar with. If you're bold in your statements and in your product and in your innovation, whether it's service or physical product, you can afford that to translate into how you're working and how you're communicating with your colleagues, because you're attracted to it, aren't you?
Yeah.
Successful brands we're all attracted to. We want to be associated with that brand, and in turn, if that's us as employees wanting to go to that workspace, we're attracted to it, and they can afford to be.
Yeah.
Leading,
I guess the thing is with brands like that, though, I almost feel like, again, obviously, from outside looking into that world of like strategy and workplace consultancy and that sort of thing, for me, it feels like it's easier for those big brands to kind of have that, because they already have such a carved out identity. It already means so many things to other people within that business. But when you get into, boutique finance companies, or you get into, I don't know, banks, different like legal companies, obviously, yes, they have a culture, they have an identity, but it's probably, again, from the outside looking in, probably less obviously identifiable to those employees if there is not, that real strong feeling within the business.
Yeah. I think, that's a very good point. I just think of the three: effectiveness, efficiency, and experience.
Right.
And when you look into those three and how they overlap, it tends to tell you which way that you need to.
Yeah, of
course. You need to go. So to your point, the banks, where are they most effective? Where are the individuals most efficient? And you're not only looking at the now, which I believe is one of our greatest. It's the thing that trips us up, actually. We often look at the now, or where do we gain empirical data from? Well, that's what we've done for the last 6 months. And that's telling us, well, we were more efficient working, here, and we start to put everything into very rigid boxes of because we were more efficient and we were more effective. Oh, but we've got an issue with our experience.
Yeah.
So do we just need to focus on the experience? Well, no, because you might lose efficientness and
it's like
effectiveness.
it all affects each other, right? It's
yeah,
not just
they're
one or the other.
all intertwined, and we've got to get that thing right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, on that experience point, I mean, I'm kind of interested from this side of things, really, how big or how important has experience become? Because it feels like it's become like maybe the most important thing.
Yeah.
Not that it wasn't important before, but I think maybe now, you know, we're moving towards designing spaces based on experience rather than
Yes.
productivity necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's your thoughts on how that's changed and perhaps why?
Well, I think the whys. How has it changed? It has changed and is changing. I think to my point about kind of accelerating what the workplace would be, you know, it really all how's it changed? It's more about the social interaction. It's the humans with humans. It's the need to be together to develop new. You know, certainly in this country, we're an incredibly intellectual group of service-driven organisations, and it's the quality of the services and how we create them, how we deliver them, how we market them, way beyond the UK. We are the kind of go-to globally, really, for service-led industry. And we need to be together to do that. If we fall into a process-driven economy, then that's a thing that can be replicated with a lot more ease.
I mean, even the word process, when you're talking about workplace, kind of strikes fear into me, like of that old, like regimented, cellularized traditional space versus, obviously it's not chaotic, but that movement, that freedom, that kind of hybrid has seemingly given. I get it almost like it's just kind of like moved with the times, and people have just realised that is just how they want to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we focus too much on the process, we're replaceable, aren't we? So many of those roles that were in existence 20 years ago, we found the technology to do a portion of that and ultimately replace, therefore, a proportion of the people doing those roles.
Yeah.
So it's far more about giving people space to interact, give them time as well.
Yeah.
To interact. I don't just mean the physical space. I think the mental space to interact and create something new, because it's the creation of the new that leads to growth more.
Yeah, of course.
More for organisations, and I think that's the thing that's changed. Why is it changed? Because we were forced into a thing that had to make it change.
Yeah, I feel like
right?
I asked that question sort of knowing the answer.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it goes to demonstrate how incredibly adaptable we are.
Yeah.
But I suppose on a there is a level within me that think, you know, what a shame that it took
something like that.
It had to take a monumental event for us to reconsider what we're doing. We've all reconsidered what we're doing in life.
Yeah,
you know, it's a huge shift culturally in what we're reconsidering, and it stands to reason that we've all done it on a personal level with the amount of people moving homes, relocating, downsizing, upsizing, moving to the country. All these things are going on, and all this movement, and it stands to reason that that's going to translate into the spaces that we connect. You know, it's not just workplace; it's bars, it's social, it's you know, hospitality industry. What are we all doing to reconnect with each other? And I think that as designers, that's the thing we need to consider. As experts, as analysts, we need to consider that as well. It's really all on a human level. We have to think about what we're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, for me, a lot of the stuff that I write about for, you know, whether it's for social media, whether it's for the website, I do use data and I do look at, you know, reports. And obviously you have to. You can't just make up what's going on. However, going back to your point about the human element, I do just think that there are a certain amount of things that you can't just heavily base on data and science. Are we kind of now in a place where we're a little bit more flexible, we are a bit more adaptable to kind of go, okay, well, that just doesn't work for us now?
I think if I start with probably a blanket statement, and maybe the easiest way to answer that is, you know, if we rely on the data, what do we get? Well, I believe you get a more efficient version of what you've already got.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
You can deep dive and analyze, data is ultimately driven by ensuring that you're asking the right questions of the information that you're looking to receive.
Infinite
right?
regress and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and we could go down.
That's a rabbit hole.
Very deep rabbit holes on all of that. But ultimately, however we capture that data, and there are a number of studies that we've done that are incredibly granular on the information, the flow of people, where they're using space, how they're using space, time of day they're using it, the activity, number of people in the environments, that we can be really precise. If we follow that and try to go, how does that inform what the future is? Well, we will absolutely get a more efficient version of the same thing.
Sure.
The value in doing it is it often gives you the opportunity to find the evidence that supports a theory. Right. It's really often the case that a business is wanting to change. Maybe they're bringing a new team in because they want to develop a new proposition, right? They're bringing a new team in, or a team is about to grow significantly because of a new market they're in, right? That team is telling us that they absolutely need more of this and this and this facility to enable that growth. And they're telling us that what they've got today is actually preventing their growth, right? So we can then analyse how they've used that. Is there evidence that proves that they have absolutely been using that space in the way that they believe they've been using that one? So,
I'm imagining that probably more often than not, they're not.
We've actually had one or two examples where you're right in that. More often than not, our perception versus the reality is almost always a polar apart. There's a really interesting statistic that I share with you. When we ask businesses that we're working with, we ask them, individuals, to apportion their time spent on different tasks, right? The total is always in excess of 100%. So where they find this extra thing
it's
from,
a bad start.
But it's really interesting because it's just a simple example, I guess, to demonstrate. We overestimate a certain thing that we're doing. Very rarely do we underestimate it. Very rarely. But we have had an example of an organisation that were adamant that they were using this thing. Most of the rest of the organisation thought, actually, no, we don't see that happening. So it's not just the perception of what a team needs, but it might be the perception of other teams within the same organisation thinking, oh, no, they don't do that thing as much. Well, the evidence told us that they absolutely do need it, and they needed more of it. And so I guess the point, data is invaluable if you need to prove a theory or hypothesis or disprove that theory. Is it the only thing? No, because the one thing that I believe that we don't necessarily give enough time to is intuition. I believe so many of the most successful people that on a personal level that I've met, that intuition is one of their greatest weapons, if you like. It's such a powerful thing. So yes, we need the comfort, let's say, of the evidence and data, and then we need intuition and experience.
I guess it's like how precise can you be with some of this data we're talking about? Can you go into like real minutia, or is it kind of like basic observation studies and that sort of stuff?
It's from a technology point of view, you can go into incredibly fine information. You can set up a network of sensors within any environment to a quarter of a square meter tell you who and how and that thing's being used. It's
that's cool.
There's some incredible nets that we can apply, and technology that captures all of that movement, motion. We can even do things that with like heat sensors in rooms that tell you not just, it can tell you how many people are in a room, without people feeling like they're being spied on. We can't put cameras into a room. That never feels right. I know that was a kind of thing years ago in the retail world, and and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, so it can be incredibly detailed, and there are certain situations that you need to deploy that type.
Sure.
There just are. If the price of the real estate, or if there's a real pressure on the number of people using that thing, and an organisation can't move beyond those walls, or whatever it is, there may be a need to deploy that, and we do occasionally. And one of the trends that we are seeing, though, is going almost back to a workplace analysis study pre-tech that we could put into spaces, was the observational stuff. Floor walkers, you might remember those days. People with clipboards walking around and checking signs of life and what's going on here, and creating all these graphs and that. And again, back then that was incredibly valuable information that we were gleaning. But interestingly, that's kind of becoming a little bit more prevalent. So we're spending more time. We're not capturing data in that way anymore. Right. But what we are doing is spending more time observing.
Okay.
So and again, I think this comes back to the experience and the intuition. So you're doing experience is two things really. What we're spending time in building spaces to observe how people are reacting to their existing environment. So how, what are the positives? What are the negatives? How do we improve those things? And it's also experience of the people observing.
Okay.
Is really important.
Yeah.
It's like, you go into a cool bar, right? Or
it feels,
you feel
feels
right.
a certain way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why have
there's an atmosphere.
Yeah.
Maybe there's music or the lighting or whatever. Yeah.
Do any of us ever stop to analyse why we're affecting that? No. Apart from me, because I'm a bit odd.
Time,
right? Okay, that happens a few times.
Yeah.
But when we do, it is that exactly as you described it. It's often a combination of things, isn't it? It's the music, it's a vibe, it's all of these things. It's texture, it's material, it's light, it's all of these things that are affecting, controlling maybe to an extent how we act and how we behave.
Yeah.
And that's true of any environment that we enter. And I think that's why I say the kind of experience isn't just, we're not just looking at how the individuals experience in their space, but it's making sure that the people that have experience of observing and studying and behavioural traits, tricks, things like that, and how are they reacting to that environment is really important.
Just on that observation point, because that was like the first, I guess, real sense of like workplace analysis or consultancy, whatever you want to call it. Like when I started doing this, 6 and a bit years ago, that felt like a really smart thing to do because obviously you're placing someone in the space, it all makes sense. But in a relatively short space of time, you're now talking about nets that can measure people's occupancy in a meeting room. Obviously, that's quite a jump in what feels like a short space of time. Have we changed the way that we design spaces because of those because of those updates to the technology, or have things just moved on?
That's a really good question. They have just moved on.
Okay.
I found what is quite interesting. The technology has been around for 20 years.
Right.
The sensors that can track motion, heat, light have been around for 20 years.
Right. Okay.
It's our adoption of those technologies which is incredibly slow. Partly commercially, right?
Yeah, of course.
They cost more to deploy than
simple as that.
Yeah. Partly because historic infrastructure, plumbing, heating, cooling, radiators, pipes, and all of these changes and mechanical systems and so on and so on. So, but actually, when you strip all of those layers away and you start to think about, well, what does the future look like? What can we deliver power distribution over low power, not mains voltage? And yes, we can do all of that, and that's been around for like 20 years.
Yeah.
But the adoption of it there's a fear.
Yeah, so it's not like the tech's not there.
No,
it's just how we actually integrate it into what we do.
Yeah, and I think for me that's where the progression needs to come in new developments and in new infrastructure, we need to start thinking much earlier in the process and not just repeating that mechanical and electrical system, not just repeating, the building materials that we've always done, right? Yeah. I think there are huge opportunities. It's not necessarily our world in what we do. It's more architects, developers, infrastructure stuff. But we know that when we've had complete Cat A spaces or shell and core spaces, and we've been developing those strategies, then you can embed all of that technology and all of that information gathering. And if you can do it at that point, well, then the long-term benefits are significant. Yeah. However you want to look at it, whether you want to look at it from an environmental point of view, an energy point of view, the data capture is there. It's embedded into the building, and it's going to tell you. Yeah. You can actually write profiles against that. The building will start talking to you and telling you how to adapt your operation, how to, silly little example, right? There's been a spike, 20% above average occupants coming in the door today. We need to get more coffee to the coffee machines, right? Yeah. That. I mean, it's
like operational stuff that makes a difference to going back to experience, how you feel. The coffee machine isn't empty, or the right playlist is on, or whatever, to match the mood of or the occupancy.
That's a lovely example. If you can get into that emotive level, and it's pretty easy to do, actually. Could every user of the building submit their own playlist? Every employee submit their own playlist, and then what happens is, based on, it knows that you've walked in the door, Tom, right? And it knows that I've walked in the door, and therefore, and that we're the only two in the building, right? And it's just put this mashup of our playlists together. Well, you could do stuff like that. It's not.
I don't know what that would turn out as, to be fair, but but I think that sort of stuff's really interesting to me. I mean, I think. I just want to there's one more thing that I want to ask you, which I'm kind of interested to get your thoughts on, is obviously just mentioning like commercially viable. Obviously, a lot of stuff we do, it has to be that at a base level, because that's just how it works. But if you could, have like a no holds barred analysis of a space, you've got all the tech available to you, you can do what you need to do. What would it be, or what would some of the things be that you would want to go into that perhaps you haven't had the opportunity to do?
I think that's actually a very complicated question in many ways.
I haven't realised what I've unearthed there.
Yeah, I think it can be the case that the natural thing to do is to try and unearth an understanding of every corner of that building and how people are using, every space in it. Actually, I don't think that's necessary. Okay. If I'm honest, actually, the most important thing is to analyse where people are interacting most. Right. So you can take a floor plan of a building, and anything that's kind of a service, a support, we don't need to capture too much information around how they're used, right? Where we do is around what's important to the people. So that first point of entry, what's going on there, those chance interventions, whether it's T points, the collision points that you design into a space, really important to understand how frequent are they happening, when are they happening, how are they happening. Data can tell us that. Really important to understand when we've deployed choice around meeting spaces, not just meeting rooms, scale of meeting rooms, which ones are the most successful. Really important to know that. That's really important. We're finding as a small example, the phone booth that everybody seems to say, hey, we need a phone booth in the office because Teams or Zoom calls and all that sort of stuff, right? Well, there is a increasing school of thought. Well, you're only replicating a thing that you've got at home, right? And you're actually isolating yourself from the group that you've come in to be with. So what we're finding actually is more, sometimes we call them the buddy booth, the two-person thing. Right, yeah. I mean, we use them a lot around here, don't we? And I think that's really important. But how important is it? So I would want to know that level of detail, all of the points in which people are connecting, within a space is super important. And then it comes to the scale. So when I spoke about the kind of the net that you're throwing over it, right? This is like a fine mesh net that you throw over those points. Like the traditional kind of desking zones, the work zones, the more process center, you throw a much bigger, wider net over those spaces. So you've got to get, I think, scale is appropriate. I'm not sure I've entirely.
No, you have, because I think what I'm getting from that, to be fair, is actually that it's less about, gimmicky tech and having, being able to know which way someone walked to a coffee machine and how long they took on that journey, but more about the actual interactions that are happening. Definitely. Where are they happening? Yeah. What are the preferential choices over different environments? It's, again, it goes back to that idea of experience and what people are doing rather than like necessarily how they're doing it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the tools is heat mapping a space. So where are people congregating and how often, what's their settle time? That's really, really important, because there are moments in any building that you want people to accelerate through it and you want them to move on, and and there are other moments you want them to stay still. So the heat mapping thing that we can do, that's really important, because that helps us understand how spaces need to change. Where we just want to slow people down, whether it's a bridge in an environment that's got a little balcony off it, then you just want people to have a little moment as they're crossing the bridge. Those are really great spaces. We've been designing for thousands of years, right? We don't often think about them too often. Right, actually. We don't often think about those influences in a workspace, but they're really important as well. If we just create long, thin corridors in workspace where we want people to efficiently flow from A to B, right? Because, we're missing an opportunity there. As well.
100%. Yeah. Right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap there. Really appreciate you talking to me about that. I think we covered some pretty broad ground, and for me, I just really enjoyed that. So thank you very much.
Likewise. Thanks very much, Tom.
Cheers.
Cheers.